Alright, I'm recording this. We're going to look at today's Advent of Code, day 1, December 1st. And it says we start with a big old list of numbers. The numbers are calories for items carried by elves. One elf might have a bunch of items, one elf might have just a few, but we care about the total number. So this elf has one really huge item with a lot of calories, so he might total more than this one, even if it's fewer lines. And it's a ton of lines. The whole thing is like 2,000 lines. So we can't go through it by hand unless it takes all day. I'm going to copy this, Control A, Control C, and I'm going to put it in a file. Not the main file, because it would get in the way. I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it data.txt. Why not? And in there I'm going to hit paste. See, 2,200 lines. Now, in the main file, we're going to load that into some Python object, like a list. And the way to do that is to say open with our file, if I could type, and then we give it a name. I'm just going to call it data. Usually people will call it file or F or something like that. However, in Python, when you open something, there's a little bit of difficulty where you have to close the file. Sometimes it doesn't quite work. So they've added a feature which is really nice. It's called a context manager that handles that for you. And all you have to do is say with. So if I say with open as data, then it doesn't ask me to close it. Doesn't worry about errors. It's going to be fine. So now all we have to do is read that. And I'm going to make a list. I'm going to call it lines, because this is just the raw data that's not quite ready yet. I'm going to say data.readLines, and that's, you see it turns blue. That's a method of getting everything into a list. If I say print lines right now, it's going to print this really ugly list. It's not quite ready for processing yet. You see, it's got all the numbers, but they have this \n character, which is a new line. It's a new line sort of from typewriter or teletype days. And it's not going to allow us to use that. If we try to add up our numbers, it's going to say, well, we don't know what a /n is. So we have to peel that off. We're going to use a method called strip. Strip is something that you can do with strings, and it takes off spaces and new lines and things like that that just only exist for formatting. So I'm going to make a new list. I'm going to call it calories, because that's actually what it is. Calories equals line.strip for line and lines. I know that looks silly, but that's going to result in this. If I say print calories, now I'm going to have one that's slightly nicer of just the numbers. Okay, they're still strings, so we got to do one more step. And every once in a while, there's a blank line, as you see right here, that's going to be our cue to add up the lines we've seen. So like if there's an elf who has this, we keep adding, keep adding, keep adding, and then when we hit the blank, we go, okay, that's one elf. He has the total of all of these. And then we start over to count the next one. So I'm going to say probably a for loop, right? For, I don't know, for calorie in calories, I'm going to say if calorie, if it is there, like if it's not a blank, then elf plus equal, I guess I'm going to have to say int of calorie, and that means I have to create the elf in the first place, initialize it. What else do I do? I'm not sure. There will be something. And then if I don't have the calorie, like if it's a blank, then I'm going to say elves.append elf. That means the blank is our cue to add it to a list of elves. I'm keeping a list of the totals, not single lines, but the totals of like 10 lines added up or whatever. Also, I've got to initialize that. And what else do we got? I have to start my counter back at 0. Like, once I've added it to the list, I have to start over for the new one. And I think that's it. Let's see what happens. Print elves. So now we're not printing the giant list, we're printing the list of totals. Oh, I just thought of one thing that is missing, but okay, this is good. This is like, see how the numbers are bigger? This 59202 is all of these added up. And this 49480 is all of these added up. So the list has a lot fewer items in this because it's packing in the ones that are for a single elf. So this guy has a lot of items that add up to 49480. And this guy has not quite as many, but they're bigger, so it adds up to 59202. However, I just remembered that this doesn't include the very last one. Like, when I'm in the very last one, it doesn't add it to the list of elves because it doesn't hit a blank. Like, we're adding it when we hit a blank, so I have to add one more line that says, oh, don't forget the last elf. Okay? So I'm just going to do it in a very silly way, which is just to do it again at the end. Elves.append elf. Okay? So I'm going to run it again just to make sure I didn't mess it up. And the last one here is 495 something, and you see there's another at the end, 35389. So I did catch that one last guy. Now, what I need to do to find the biggest one, the elf with the most, is very easy. There's a max function in Python. If you say max of this, it'll give you the highest number. So if I say print max of elves, it says 69836. So that's the elf with the most calories. It might not be the most items because they might be bigger items added up, as opposed to, you know, an elf with 1,000,000 grains of rice is not as much as an elf with 1 bison or something. But that's the answer. Okay, part 1, I already typed it in earlier today, so that's the right answer. And I've heard that the guy who makes this website doesn't like you to show the question. Like, that's his intellectual property, so I'm not going to go over to the website and show the question. Now, the really interesting part is part 2, because these questions all have a part 2. They all say, well, okay, now you've done the easy stuff. Now we know you're on the right track. Let's go for something slightly more interesting. And the part 2 of this one says, we want to find the top 3 elves. Okay? We want to say that, you know, what if the elf with the most runs out of snacks and we have to go to second place? Now, that's difficult because we can't use max anymore. At least, we can't only use max. We have to say, well, what about second place? What about third place? And so I could think of 2 ways to do that. One is to use max and then pull him out of the list, use max again, pull him out of the list, use max again. We are lucky that Python has that max. Not every language does, and we would have had to write it ourselves if we were using a different language. Now, we could also sort of homebrew our version of a top 3 to go through the list, look at each one and say, okay, does it qualify for top 3? If so, we kick out the lowest of our top 3 and put this guy in and keep looking through and doing that, in which case we would say, by the end, we've got our actual top 3. Okay? I would like that, but I'm going to go with the cheaper version and just use max, use max, use max. Okay? So what I want to do is I'm going to make a list of our top 3. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want to top 3 dot append max of elves. So it's going to add on the winner to that list, and then I have to remove him so that the next time I ask for top 3, he's not going to be included. And you know what? I would say elves.remove max of elves, but I don't like the fact that I'm repeating that. I'm sort of asking the computer to do that twice. Like, maybe it's going to cache it, maybe it's not. So I'm going to make a variable to hold that, just to be nice. So I'm going to say, hey, find the max, and then use that number twice. So, okay, we found the top, we add him to our list, and then we remove him from the big list. And then I want to do that whole thing 3 times. So I'm just going to do a for loop. For underscore in range 3, we can do that 3 times. And then I'm going to print the top 3 to see if, first of all, that should be one of them, right? If he's not one of them, then I know there's a problem. And I also should see that the other 2 are close, that they're not like way smaller or something. And so if I do that, it's going to be this number and 2 other ones that are very close. So while I'm not verifying it in any way, I can think that's likely to be the actual top 3. And the question asks for their sum, because the questions on Advent of Code just ask you to type in a box. They don't analyze your code or anything like that. So they usually ask for a single number. So we're going to say print sum of top 3. Sum is also a built-in function in Python. We're lucky to have it. Not every language does. And we can say 207K 968. And again, I did that earlier. I input that in the box and got the gold star. So we would do something like that. I'm sure there are blazing fast Galaxy Brain ways to write this code in a much nicer fashion, but what I've done is perfectly fine and it works. Maybe if the list was like 100 times longer, this would be slow and we could use something more optimized. But for day 1, and usually day 1 is the easiest, it works just fine. So let's go with that.